Welcome to World We Got This, with your host, Esau Williams.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today we're diving into something you probably haven't thought about when you sit down for a meal. Water. Not the glass on your table, but the hidden water that flows through every bite you take. From the coffee in your cup to the beef in your burger, food production uses vast amounts of water, and most of us never see it. In this episode, Ben Haines explores the concept of virtual water and what it means for the choices we make every day. He speaks with Professor Nahu Mirumachi, a leading expert on water governance, and hears from a UK cafe chain that's trying to make menus more water-friendly. So, how much water is really on your plate, and what can we do about it? Let's find out.
I have never thought about that once in my life, honestly, until you mentioned it. I will think about it now, but I have never thought about it before.
When you buy food from a supermarket, you can turn the pack over and see all the ingredients in the food. You can see how much protein, fibre, carbohydrates, even calories. I mean, it's what makes me regret eating that second donut. But there's one ingredient that's essential. You can guarantee it's been used in some way to produce it, and you, like me, might not have even thought about it.
So usually no, but it's only when I really don't like the food I bought that I think about it.
In clothes, I think about it.
When I have their made ChatGPT, I think about it.
Pretty much everything else other than food making, I think.
Yeah.
Can you guess what it is? It's water, and specifically fresh water. Growing the food we eat accounts for, on average, 72% of global annual water consumption. So what we eat and drink really matters in combating water use. Every burger, every avocado, every cup of coffee carries an invisible price tag measured in litres of water. So if it's so essential to make the food that we eat, why don't we know more about it? And should we spend more time considering it when we decide what to put on our plates? I'm Ben from the School of Global Affairs at King's College London, and in this episode I set out to understand how much water is really flowing through our food and what happens when we actually try and change the way we eat because of it. So how much water do we use to make our food? It sounds like a simple question. Well, you've got the water that's in the food, the bits you can see when you squeeze a tomato, or hear when you crunch some crispy lettuce. But there's lots of water you can't see, in growing the crops, or the drinking water for the animals. But what about the water you need for washing the produce, or for the processes like fermenting? It sounds like it can get pretty complicated pretty quickly.
Hello, my name is Professor Nahu Mirumachi at the Department of Geography at King's College London. I'm also the co-director of the King's Water Centre.
Nahu spends her time researching the big questions around water, the politics and governance of it, and trains policymakers and professionals on water security and cooperation. So when it comes to water use in food, Nahu's the person to ask.
There's 3 different types of water. So there's blue water, which is the water that we would maybe sprinkle and irrigate our fields with. That comes from rivers and lakes, even groundwater aquifers. But there's also what we call green water. It's water that originates from rain and gets trapped in as soil moisture. And having soil moisture is extremely important because if you don't have that, then you really can't do any farming. So having green water is very important. And then there's this third water that we call gray water, which is water that's used to clear and dilute pollution. So if we use, for example, pesticides, fertilizers, we also do need a certain amount of water to clear that pollution. So green, blue, and gray water all come together. The other very interesting aspect of why there is so much water in the food that we eat is it's not because we eat a lot of broccoli or spinach or tomatoes, and maybe we should be trying to aim for a 5 a day. But actually, it's the amount of water that goes into producing industrialized animal feed. It's because nowadays we eat a lot of meat, and it's not necessarily pasture, free range type of meat that we eat. And a lot of the times, the cows, the pork, the chicken that we consume require industrialized animal feed. And so a lot of the land that we have on this planet goes towards making things like soybean, which we don't eat, but the cows do, or making barley that doesn't necessarily come to our table per se, but is fed into animals, and the large scale production of animal meat that we demand today in our food. So I think that's the really interesting aspect of thinking about food. It's not just what lands on our plate per se in the shape of a broccoli or a carrot, but it's also the amount of food that is made for animals that we then eat.
So you have the different types of water that we use in the food production process: green, blue, and grey. And as you go up the food chain in the things that you eat, it adds more water because you need to grow the things that those animals eat. So how do we factor all this water in when it comes to looking at specific foods?
So, water that's embedded in food is called virtual water. And so we can calculate how much water is embedded in food, and we call this the water footprint. So, there are some crops that have a high water footprint, and there are some crops or vegetables or agricultural products that have a lower water footprint. And it's not very easy to spot them in the supermarket aisle, unfortunately. Things as simple as a cup of coffee. It's something that you can hold in your hand that looks quite small and quite deceptive. Actually, it can be 280 liters of water just gone into that single cup of coffee. And that's because the water used to grow the coffee bean is water thirsty. So that's why even if it's a small portion, just a single a cup can be 283 liters. Things like apple juice also is around 230 liters per serving, for example. And this is just naturally because apples require a certain amount of water to grow and to become apple juice that we can consume. So it's not to say that there are certain foods that are bad or certain foods that are good in terms of water footprint. It's more about trying to figure out how we can combine these food choices so that we can make sustainable water and food choices as we go about our daily lives. And the rule of thumb is that roughly, if you have a meat eating diet, if you live in the UK, for example, it's about 4,500 liters of water per se. That's roughly the rule of thumb that we have. But you can reduce this by having a vegetarian diet, and quite often vegetarian diets are half of that. So if you're walking down the supermarket aisle, you might think about the combinations of having some meat products, but replacing some meat products with other types of vegetables or some plant-based foods, for example. But as I say, it's not very easy. Like you would think an apple or a cup of coffee is, not necessarily a high offender, but it does naturally have a higher water footprint than others.
So the amount of virtual water is the thing we need to look at. As Naho said, virtual water describes all the water that was used to produce the food that you can't see. This is then used to produce the water footprint. Naho surprised me by saying coffee and apple juice have a higher water footprint as crops. I enjoy a cup of coffee in the morning, and I'm not alone in this morning ritual. According to the UK Coffee Association, in the UK we consume 98 million cups of coffee a day. And as Naho said, with a virtual water footprint of 280 litres per cup, that sounds like a lot of water is going into our morning habit. And it is. But to put it in context, Naho also mentioned that meat has a high water footprint. And the global average for the amount of water used to produce 1 kilogram of beef is 15,000 litres of water. I feel like this aligns with something else that's more familiar in our choices around food: the carbon footprint. So how do these two footprints interact?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about, the relationship with the carbon footprint and the water footprint. So if you eat a less meat intensive diet, so if you have more of a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet, you probably will have a lower carbon footprint and also a lower water footprint as well, largely because, as we know, cows produce a lot of methane, which contributes to climate change impacts, but also because the beef products that we eat today quite often are industrialized and industrially produced, which means we rely on huge amounts of animal feed. But there are certain types of food that we just simply can't grow. For example, in the UK, we simply can't grow the amount of coffee that we need to satisfy all our demands. And so, in many ways, the world is dependent on each other. Many countries are dependent on each other to have the supermarkets and the types of diet that we want and demand. And so, in the case of coffee, for example, the carbon footprint of the coffee and the water is a very complex situation because we have to import it and there will be a carbon footprint attached to it. And also because coffee is naturally a water intensive crop, it has a higher water footprint than other types of beverages, for example. And so the question is, well, how do you sort of think about the way in which many countries are reliant upon each other, knowing that there is probably not a single country in the world that's self-sufficient when it comes to food. So we do have to rely on these trade systems where we can move food from one part of the world to another to meet our diets.
When Naho speaks about walking around the supermarket and the choices we make as individuals, it feels like it's the quickest way to make a change if that's something you want to do, not to pick up this item or to switch for another. But we're part of a massive global supply chain of food, and also, by the sounds of it, virtual water that flows around the world. It's commercial organisations that are connected with this, and they can have real wholesale impact. So what would introducing a low water menu in a commercial cafe chain actually look like? Is it possible, and would customers even care? This isn't just a thought experiment.
I am Noemi. I work for Benugo at the Welcome Collection. I am general manager and I look after the catering for the public restaurant and the hospitality business.
Benugo is a cafe chain that operates across the UK with over 180 outlets. And if you've ever been to one of the popular galleries or venues in the UK, you've probably had one of their sandwiches.
About 6 or 7 months ago, I was introduced to Naho and we started having a conversation about how we can tweak or work on our menu to make our products a lot more water friendly, if that's the right word.
The new cafe menu is part of the current exhibition at the Welcome Collection, Thirst, in Search of Fresh Water, which explores humanity's vital connection with fresh water as an essential source of life and a pillar of good health.
So the Welcome Collection commissioned Jane Wither Studios to develop a water footprint menu. And I've been working with Jane Wither Studios for a very long time, working on different cafes and different menus over the last 10 plus years.
So how does making these low water use changes differ in a commercial context compared to when you're cooking at home?
So we have to sometimes adhere to a centralized menu, and we have to use suppliers which have been selected by the wider company, and we cannot deviate from those suppliers a lot. We have a head chef on site which can create a specific recipe, but for majority of the other products, we have to stick to what the centralized menu does, which our food development team produces in the head office. It's quite a difficult process as well when you have to think about allergies, dietary requirements, and sudden last minute changes that you cannot really do in order to make sure you're lawfully compliant to the allergen requirements and management requirements. What we did together was basically analyze our existing menu and understand what kind of changes we could do to not miss out on the product, on the quality of the product, on the taste, but make it a lot more sustainable. So we have actually taken apart each and every ingredient of our menu. We measure the weight, how much salt goes into the recipe, how much pepper, how much flour, how many tomatoes, how many sesame seeds in the salad, in the baguette as well. And we've given it to Naho. And then what she's done is just gone ahead and calculated a water footprint, which we found out together was actually quite hard to do when you work on a larger scale of a business and some products that you use are not necessarily from scratch. It's not just a tomato. Sometimes you use a dressing, and to really understand what ingredients is in there, what proportions, is something that it's kind of hard to do because not every supplier will let you know how much of each ingredient is inside an item that they're producing for you.
As an academic, we think that, oh, okay, so for this menu, these potatoes will come from here, and this broccoli will come from here, and this apples will come from here. It seems very straightforward. For us, it's like we will consult our databases and then we crunch our numbers and produce the water footprint. But actually, the reality is so much more complex when it is about a commercial cafe context, that the supply chains are very complex.
And this challenge wouldn't be unique to Bonogo. It's the nature of any large-scale commercial cafe chain. So once the team analysed the menu, what are the types of changes they could make?
So then we just went ahead together and said, okay, well, we have these amazing salads and we still have it in the cafe. It's a broccoli and beetroot salad. And we said, okay, what if we tweak that dressing? Was initially was a miso sesame dressing, which has got obviously soybeans and sesame, which have got a really high content of water in them. And we've reduced slightly the proportions. We swapped the oil that we're using for maybe half rapeseed oil, which, it's actually a lot more sustainable. And then we just worked together and created a menu that we're now proposing to our guests, which doesn't miss out on the quality, doesn't miss out on the taste, but it's just giving you the option to know exactly what's in your dish. And we did the same with coffee. As now mentioned, coffee is one of those items that intrinsically has got a lot of water. There's nothing you can do about it. But maybe I could swap that cow's milk for oat milk, and that makes it instantly more water friendly. So we try to educate our customers to just make some better choices.
Wait. Sometimes when we try and make these positive changes, they can come at a financial cost, which is important to consider as a commercial business and also for individuals in a cost of living crisis. But Noemi shares how these changes didn't actually cost more to do.
Even actually, the changes that we did to the salads, they helped us keep the cost low and keep it affordable for all of the customers. So I guess from a commercial point of view, there was a scare that the ingredients that will be more sustainable or water friendly might come a bit more expensive, but that wasn't the case at all through
When
this
you start
project.
changing sandwiches, cakes, or salads, the customer is the one that decides if something sticks or not. The proof's in the pudding, as the saying goes, or in this case, salad. So, what did the customers think of the new menu?
They were really, really happy to see that we've actually have something in the cafe that is linked to the exhibition, because it just makes feel like the whole building and the food and our offering is what the vision is for Welcome Collection, really. We had a lot of people asking questions about it because the water footprint is something quite new. Not everyone is familiar with it, and it was great to be able to give some answers and explain how actually we worked a lot on this. And yeah, we've seen loads of people asking if the menus that we've developed together could be taken home because they knew of a friend who would have really liked that and said, oh, you know what? McDonald's should do this. This would be really important if they did that. So yeah, it's a mixed feedback from a lot of people. Of course, you get that customer that is like, I think this is interesting, but I will stick with the ham and cheese baguette. And really, we're not trying to preach to anyone what they should have on their plate. We just want to make people aware of some better choices we could do as a whole.
The cafe menu is currently temporary, along with the exhibition, but it's a proof of concept, and it's not the only one. As Naho mentioned, through her work with Jane Withers Studios, is something they've been looking at for a long time. So what's the legacy of something like this for an organisation like Benugo, and how has it impacted their approach to menu design going forward?
I guess for me now, having had all of the conversations with Now and the team, it was really important as some aspects that I never thought about really, especially because I do follow a vegan diet. And for me, certain ingredients, I thought they would have been the most sustainable to begin with. But actually, I found out that, miso is probably not one of the safest choices. So I guess that's really helpful when the head chef will come and present the new menus to me. I will say, can we maybe do some changes to this? Or actually, they would present a perfect recipe already because they've had all of these interactions with us, and they know what we need to think about. They know what kind of things, what changes, what ingredients we need to pick in order to keep the menu, even after we move away from the Thursday exhibition, to keep it water friendly, sustainable, and kind of have a legacy of this exhibition.
This can feel like a lot to take on board. So I asked Naho what her advice would be to take away when thinking about the water footprint of food.
There's so much information around food, lots of labels that pop up if you just go to the supermarket and just even pick up a packet of sugar or something like that. So there's a lot of things that we have to process in our everyday lives. And the water footprint is to help people think around the complexity, not necessarily to shame people into the food choices that they make or make them feel guilty about the certain food choices that they make. So it's really about how can we think about alternatives? What are the alternatives to our existing food choices that we can make? And I think that's my real key takeaway, to really have everybody on board around the table to talk about these issues. And quite often it turns out that it's not necessarily, as I say, about radically changing the menu or radically changing the way we source our food or forcing people to have option A over option B. It doesn't have to be so construed like that. It can be these small tweaks that can be done to a menu. It can be adding another optional alternative, vegan option, for example, that might widen the choice for people to make informed decisions. And I think that's where the power is, for people to make these small changes, but that can be very sustainable.
So the amount of water we use to make our food is important, but it's also complicated. Often the two go hand in hand. But like Naho said, maybe it's about these small changes that are the most sustainable. And yes, it's something we can do as individuals. I could swap my coffee out every other morning for something else, or continue trying to eat less meat, which is good for our health and our carbon footprint. But it's something that larger scale organisations can do too, as Benugo proved. So maybe even just through asking the question and thinking about how much water we use to make our food, we can begin to make the changes we want to make, as individuals and as a society.